to Product Academy Tough Stuff, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get straight to the toughest challenges in product management. I'm Tanja Lau.
And I'm Francesca Cortesi.
In each episode, we tackle one tough question. No fluff, no filler. Just candid insights from seasoned product leaders.
Our guests deliver actionable, real-world answers. Whether you're an experienced product leader or just stepping into the product world, this is your go-to podcast for sharp, tested advice, condensed for your busy schedule.
One tough challenge, practical insights, short and real.
Let's dive in.
Hello, Vanaja. Welcome to our show.
Thank you, Tanja. Very honored to be here with you.
Today, I was thinking, it was 2016 when I had my first child. And by the time she turned 1, she had attended, I think, 7 or 8 management offsites. So
Wow.
I was like thinking, this topic really hits home,
God.
like how to balance parenthood and product work. That's
Yes.
something that we rarely talk about, and I'm so glad that you agreed to like have a candid conversation about it. And your son is now 3 years old, right? And
You just turned 3.
Yes. And
Full of
you have-
energy.
Yeah, perfect. And you have been a product leader before you had your kid, and now you're also in a product leadership position again. And I was wondering, can you tell us what changed for you if you compare what it felt like in being in these 2 leadership positions? Has anything changed for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has changed. I think if I take a step back, though, I think one thing that surprised me about being a parent is how much of a change in life perspective that it has given me. I would say prior to having a child, work was a very large part of my identity. And it still is to a large extent. But now having, a child, a little toddler to sort of run about, like him, my family has become very important, and it gives me a lot of meaning. And I really enjoy looking forward to spending time with him. And I feel I look at work in a little bit of a different way now. It's still something where it gives me I derive having sort of like the happiness of doing a lot of impact through it. I find the work very interesting, but I don't sweat the small stuff anymore with work. So if I have a bad day or something doesn't go according to plan, it's easier for me to almost recover from it because I have other things that I sort of look forward to. And I know in the grand scheme of things, it's not, it's not so critical of something, we don't deliver something on time. So that has been different. I think the other thing that maybe caught me by surprise of being a parent is just, everyone says this, right? As a parent, you just have to be, when you go back to work, you have to be a lot more efficient with your time management. You have to be a lot more ruthless with your prioritization because you just have less hours in the day to work with. But living it is a different reality altogether. And again, for me in a leadership position, there's just so much that you can always be doing. Your job is never done, right? Like it can never be like, okay, I'm done for the day. There's nothing more else that I can sort of further or, advance. And then, And I think for me, the struggle was also not having as many hours in the evening, not having as many hours in the weekend to be able to catch up on work. And to be able to, do as much or feel as I was being as productive as much as I was before. And that's also something that I had to change mentally and say, it's okay. I'm still focused on driving the important topics and making that impact. And just because I'm not spending X more hours in a week working on this, it doesn't mean that I'm doing less by any means.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think in general, that's a shift, a paradigm shift that is so impactful on your work. If you don't define yourself by how busy you are and how many hours you work in your day job, by like how much instead you shift your focus towards how much impact you actually have. But maybe you can also give us a bit of context, like how much were you working before in terms of like percentage or like working hours before you had your kid, and now like what does your schedule look like? Can you also maybe walk us through a day in the life of Vanaja?
Of course. I mean, it's really hard to say. Like before, I would say like my like core hours as any sort of like most people in companies, it was like 9 to 6 p.m. But of course, there were the evenings where I would work until 8 or 9 p.m. if I had to. Or if I was working from home, I would stop, have dinner, take my dog for a walk, and then come back and catch up on a little bit of work. And then sometimes even in the weekends, right? Like I would take the morning, lunchtime, do whatever, catch up with friends, and then have a little bit of the time in the evenings to just catch up, where I would have a bit of recovery, but then also work. But now so my husband and I share sort of the responsibility of dropping my son off at Kita and picking him up. And so basically I have 2 afternoons in the week where I stop working around 3:30, 4 p.m. And then I go pick up my son. And I have to be very strict about that because I need to pick him up at a certain time, not to leave him, the last person to be picked up. So that happens 2 afternoons of the week. And then the other 3 days, I stop working at 6 p.m. Sort of very, very on schedule because we have sort of dinner together as a family at about 6:30. And of course, I really want to spend time with my son after, he comes back when I finished up with work. And then, we do bedtime. And then then we have a couple of hours, as a parent, where there's a little few hours for yourself after you put your child to sleep, where you can
lucky.
Relax a little bit, do a bit of exercise or sport if you're lucky. Exactly. So one thing that's changed for me is that evenings I really cannot work anymore. Right, I stopped working either at 3:34 on the dot or at 6 p.m. It's just I'm so tired that there's no way that I can even contemplate going back to work. If anything, if there's a little bit of time thing that I need to catch up on, I do it early in the morning. So I can, sleep and wake up refreshed, but I also try to really minimize that. And I hardly ever work the weekend because it's all full of like kids activities and like social activities, and there's really not much time there either. So I would say my hours are pretty much non-Kita days, 9 to 6 p.m. On Kita days, it's 9 to 4 p.m.
And was that hard to establish? Was there pushback, or did you just show up at work and say like, this is my new schedule and this is how I'm gonna do it? Because I think you also switched jobs like once you came back from your parental leave. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah. So with my first job, when I came back from leave, I was very strict about it. I also had the benefit of working, my manager and the co-founders of the company also being parents and extremely understanding about what it was like to come back and also have to work part-time and do sort of drop-offs and like pickups from nursery. Obviously, I had the guilt about leaving work early, even if it's, your contract says you're part-time. But to a certain extent, I think I have benefited from it being normalized now a little bit more in society, that if you're leaving work at 3:30 or 4, it's not like, oh, you're not doing anything, but you actually have other obligations now. But what I did maybe more practically was as soon as I came back, I put a sort of out of office in my calendar very clearly saying that I was not available. Both on my Kita pickup days from 4 p.m. and my out of office means reject any invite automatically. Mm-hmm. And also for my evenings after 6 p.m. because I wanted to make clear that I was not available anymore. Prior to that, I was open to having conversations or meetings, like going late into the evening if someone needed it, but I made it very clear in my calendar what my availability was.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it's a smart move to have the auto reject for your meetings. I remember when I I knew I was pregnant and I started thinking about how much do I want to work when I come back. I was working full time before, and I knew I wanted to go to part time, but it's really hard to know like what is the right percentage of like
Yes.
compared to your previous contract that you want to reduce to. So I started with 70%. And I negotiated that. My boss was pretty open to it, and I started working. And in Switzerland, I have to say, for us, it's only 14 weeks of parental leave. So that's a big difference to Germany, where it's
Yes.
a year, and you can also split parts of it with your partner. But I came back super early, and there were so many things that I did not know about what it would really feel like to come back that nobody talks about. For example, I was still breastfeeding, and I was commuting from Bern to Zurich with this little travel kit and my breast milk pump, right? And I was like pumping milk in between meetings on like in the restroom
Wow.
because there was no room to do that, although you're actually legally required to have that.
Yes.
You can check what you were allowed to and entitled to legally in your country. But sometimes the reality is in my startup, like I knew that we had moved to a bigger office while I was still on leave. But when I came back, I found out that all of those new rooms had glass doors, so there was no way for me to
There's no
pump
privacy.
milk there, right? So I was in the restroom 5 minutes in between meetings pumping milk under a lot of stress, right? And I remember the day when I had to interview a candidate, and I was like literally just lactating in the interview just because like I didn't have enough time to finish pumping milk. So I'm just sharing this openly because nobody talks about this stuff. You look at your contract and it says, yeah, you're working 70%, but it does not account for like what it really feels like to adapt your schedule to what your body is going through.
For sure.
And the second thing that I wanted to flag is, and I'm curious about how you experience that, it is easy, kind of easy maybe, depending on your boss, to reduce maybe to a lower percentage of hours and also lower percentage of salary. But often your scope at work does not change. So
Yes.
how did you handle that? Did you have a conversation about this? Did you actively also manage the scope of your work? Or did you just like approach it fingers crossed that somebody else will pick up the slack when I'm gone?
Yeah, it's such a good question because, as you said, when you're in a leadership position, it's very hard to say, oh, I'm working 90% or 80% now, and this is how it translates to a reduction in scope. For me, it was almost impossible to have that and say, I'm not going to be doing this because as a product leader, I was accountable for all of that. So I had to be careful. And also, to your point, also, when I was trying to decide how much I reduced to, it was around 90%, 80% that I was thinking about. I was also like actively in my mind, right? Like I was thinking, well, I don't want to be doing everything and then be paid less for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And that was also very much a thought in my mind. But at the same time, so my work was actually quite understanding in that they gave me the flexibility and said, hey, you have full flexibility with your time. And that's one of the advantages of being also in a leadership position. I had control over my time more so than others. And they said that you can either structure it and say that you cover everything, but you do it when you want to. So even if you want to log back later in the evenings and do it, then you have the flexibility of doing that and being paid 100%, or you cut back. And then we see where you can sort of take that time out. And I made the decision that I did want to reduce my hours more as a signaling device for others to say, I'm actually part-time. So I can't be expected to do that anymore. It was less clear for me how I would do that in practice, but I wanted that way to say I am actually part-time, and therefore you can see it reflected in my calendar, and therefore I won't pick this up later. So I did make that choice. And I think in reality, so it was difficult, and I did it more as a sort of task by task, I would say. Couple of things where I could very clearly, when I came back, I said, I'm not going to do any more external events or speaking opportunities, because for me, that was kind of a nice to have an added benefit. So I completely cut that out. And I was very clear that I'm not going to be doing anything additional of that nature. And then the other thing was just in lieu of like being away on parental leave, I was away for about 9 months. It did mean that my responsibilities to a certain extent had been divided up across my team and my manager. So that kind of made it a little bit easier where things were already working. I could say, okay, you're doing a great job here, maybe sort of continue with that. Or I could see for myself, I was less needed in all the nitty-gritty meetings. I didn't necessarily have to
Right.
attend. They had been going well in my absence also. But I must say, I think when I came back, I did have this feeling of almost redundancy, where you know that you've
Oh,
been
yes.
away for a long time. The company actually survived perfectly well without
Yes.
you. Of course, some people had to take extra workload and felt a bit overwhelmed, but that was also something I kind of had to grapple with. Yeah.
Yes, it takes a toll on you. I remember that feeling. And I think it's so brave then to embrace this new opportunity to also redefine your leadership role in a way, right? Because I remember I told my team when I got pregnant, I told them that this is kind of like I call it the product pregnancy test to see if the product and the team is ready to like live without you and
Yes.
to think about like also really deliberately think about which responsibilities do we want to delegate to whom, right? So we did like what we call delegation poker. We went through a lot of things, like potential decisions as a team. And I also established a deputy at that time. And
Okay.
we talked about like which decisions can you take on your own while I'm gone, which ones need to be like pushed up and which ones can wait until I'm back. For example, do they hire someone new while you're gone or not, right? These kind of things. Or like, do you make any major portfolio shifts in the product, or do we then consult each other? And the thing is, for me, it was only 14 weeks, right? It's not so long that you hand
Yes.
over everything forever, right? I mean, it depends on how long you're gone. But for me, it was like, okay, we need to really be careful about which decisions I want them to take on their own and which stuff needs to be taken care of before or after I'm back. So yeah, that's something that worked quite well for me and also pushed me to establish a more mature and also more self-reliant organization.
Yes.
Because I was taking the reins on so many things that I didn't need to actually be involved in, and it forced me to let go of a lot of things that I should have been letting go of earlier, I guess.
Yeah, I had a very similar realization when I realized that in reality that I could see that certain things were functioning quite effectively without me. It was also sort of a awakening in myself going, okay, you don't have to be as deeply involved in that or understand the micro details of what's happening by attending every single meeting in that project also. So yeah, that I think that was an important sort of realization also in my journey. I can remember in my first week back though, this feeling of almost this insecurity of actually where am I needed? But what was, and I remember this acutely, there was this sort of people management, let's say, topic of friction where I had to involve myself very early. And I felt that I did a sort of a good job concluding it with sort of like both sides and everyone being sort of happy with the outcome. And then I was like, oh, this is my place. This is where I add value. And it was also really important sort of like thing for me to realize that, okay, I am, my role is needed. I do add value. I am taking off decisions from other people's plate who are maybe not as good as sort of driving this. So yeah, that was also good to have in my first week, this little win to remind myself.
Yeah. And did you also have to make any difficult trade-offs? Because it sounded like you were very clear on how much you wanted to work and you were able to kind of set your boundaries. But are there any difficult trade-offs that you had to make or that you still have to make in your role now?
I don't know if I can sort of point to anything very clearly. I am, let's say, I say no more. I think it's very easy to say that, but I think I have a better idea of what my capacity is like because I know it's very finite in the way that I have sort of defined it. And I stick to it. I am very brutal about sticking to my hours. So I have a better awareness of what my capabilities are and how much I can take on. And I have the benefit of working with sort of great managers and co-founders where I can be very open about that. And so, I mean, there's been plenty of opportunities where they say, oh, this is a great idea. Maybe we should look into this. And I'm very open and say, look, these are my current things that I'm working on. If you want me to be involved in driving this, then I won't be able to get it to this quarter, maybe next quarter, or we need to take something off my list. So I've become much better at doing that, and sort of advocating for what I feel that I can actually achieve and not.
Yeah, the clarity that you gain because you are deliberate about the decision that you took, that's super
Exactly.
powerful, I think.
And just really thinking of my time in a finite sense, right? And not like, oh, I can just take more and more and just work a little bit harder. So that has also sort of brought me, clarity in what the responsibilities that I agree to undertake.
Yeah, because I remember for me, one of the hard trade-offs was, for example, with these offsites that I mentioned. The management team used to go on an offsite every month for 2 days because it was the beginning of this crazy startup, and we needed to adjust on a lot of things. And I used to go on these offsites before I had my kid, and then once I came back, I was like, I can't miss those offsites because they are deciding about a lot of important strategic stuff there. So if I'm not there, who is going to advocate for our needs as product team? But also I'm breastfeeding and my kid can't sleep without me yet. And she's awake all the time at night. So I negotiated with them that I would bring Maya to the offsites. And basically the whole management team was on board, and we took turns like taking care for her. And she took her first steps at an offsite. But it was cool on the one hand side because I felt very supported and I could be there and still show that I'm on top of my game in a way. And on the other hand side, sometimes the discussions were so emotional, and so I was stressed there because I was advocating for a product being taken more seriously and so on. And of course, it takes a toll on your kid as well. I mean, she's part of all of this emotional situation as well. So it's sometimes hard. Like these trade-offs can be hard, but I think you also have to be creative and find solutions. For a certain amount of time they might work, or they might not at some point, and then you need to readjust. For example, I changed my contract again after I realized that 70%, like there's no way that this is enough time to do my job because they wouldn't reduce the scope more, and it was not possible with the team setup that we had. So I upgraded it again to 80% because I was like, I'm not getting paid less for doing the same amount of hours. So I think that's also important that you really understand that it's not like being part-time does not mean doing and like just making less money and doing the exact same job. That's just not fair.
Yeah, completely. I was just going to sort of reiterate, I think like the challenge though in a leadership position is drawing lines or boundaries is much more difficult. And just saying, oh, I won't do this, or I won't do this in like a broader subject awareness. So I think the challenge, but also in some ways the flexibility is sometimes doing it more by a topic by topic basis and saying, okay, if this sort of topic comes up, then maybe it's not something that I really look after, or we sort of schedule it to happen later in the year.
Yeah, exactly. And you said something very important. I think many people confuse requests and boundaries. And that's actually something I learned from a parenting book because a request is when you ask someone to do something or do something differently, right? But a boundary is when you tell people what you will do, and it requires them to do nothing, right? And I think just understanding this difference, it helps with kids. It's super, super important to learn that, to not just send requests, but to also really be able to set boundaries with your children. But the same works at work as well. It's really important to understand when you're sending a request and when you're setting a boundary. People don't know the difference in many occasions.
And another thing that should really go without saying, but a lot of people don't do, is just be very open in communication, right? Because I'm sure, and I've been in situations before when I hear a request and I internalize it and I think, okay, I must accomplish this, or this is something I have to do. But what I found now, especially being a parent, if I'm very open and say, hey, this is everything else that I'm working on, this is where I think priorities lie. Can we put this towards do you think that needs to go on the top of the list, or can it go later? And having, very open conversation as we prioritize as product managers on the backlog, but about also higher level topics, and just being very clear what you think you can and can't do is super important.
Yes, and it also puts the whole culture to a test, I think, at work, because often companies claim to have a certain culture, but then you are really judged by the actions that you take, right? And for us, for example, when I was the first person to have a really small kid at work, of course there were other people in the management team who had kids, but they were already older. So I was the only one the first one who got pregnant and had a kid while like also growing the startup. And when I then brought Maya to work on some occasions, suddenly there was a discussion raised by another employee who was like, can I also bring my dog? Because my dog is really important to me and I would like to bring my dog to work. And so, I mean, that really raised a lot of important discussions at work. It's like, okay, because why is it allowed for kids and maybe not for dogs? Or is it the same when I have I'm taking care of a parent? Like, I think it's really important that we then also have these kind of discussions, why we don't make exceptions and what kind of flexibility we have at work. I think it's super, super important.
Yeah. And maybe just sort of an additional point is like you just mentioned culture, and I recently changed companies, and I moved to Raisin late last year, and when I was thinking about my next role and the company that I want to work with, I was having sort of a lot of conversations with different people just to understand, you know, what the setup in different companies were, where the sort of opportunities like, and for me, it was very, very important to join a company that, you know, didn't just say that it had like a, flexible working culture, also made room for parents, but also actually lived that standard. Talking to many people, Raisin was definitely one of the companies where I really felt the culture was very strong in that manner. And for example, and I really feel it here because, you know, I have friends and parents in other companies where they get meetings put in their calendar for 7 p.m. And for me, it's like, again, I'm very clear. These are my working hours. I can't do it outside of this. And it's very much respected and understood. So I think also a lot of companies say different things, but like living the culture, actually truly valuing sort of parents and the flexibility that they need in that time of their lives. I think and also I feel even in my kind of professional history, I used to have managers who would sneak out of work by the back door to leave work early to pick up their child from nursery.
Wow.
And like that has also, I think, changed quite a bit. Of course, it differs from like company to company. But, you know, if I finish working at like 3:30 or 4, then, you know, I know I'm done for the day and I'm going to go and pick up my child. And I don't see any shame associated with that. But I think that has also changed a little bit. Yeah.
That's super good to hear. And maybe to wrap up this episode, is there any advice that you would give to your younger self or to others who are about to enter this adventure of becoming a parent in product? Is there any advice that you could give?
Yeah, I think just in terms of what we discussed, like not to scare anyone, but it is a fairly radical sort of shift in sort of your lifestyle. And I would just say embrace it. I think being a parent has taught me so much about my time being finite, of really making me a bit more introspective of what I really value in life, where I want to spend it, what's important to me. So I think, embracing everything that comes with it, but also just, especially when it comes to your career, aligning your kind of the way you work to your values, but also being very clear about where your boundaries lie. And I think in terms of being very explicit about that has really helped me, and makes it very clear for others how I want to work and what they can expect from me.
Perfect. And if I would add one thing, it's to definitely have certain assumptions and maybe goals about what it could be like after you come back from maternity leave or parental leave, but to also stay flexible for things to be radically different than what you have imagined. Because, for example, my child is super highly sensitive and she never slept, and I didn't foresee that, like how tired I would be and how much I would be able to handle, and to just like adapt as you go along and don't like stick to a plan very rigidly, because things might turn out very differently from what you have imagined. And I think it's really important to stay like open and curious and to adapt and see what's working, what's not.
Definitely. And then, as they say, as a parent with a child, every turn is a phase, right? You go through different phases, and this is exactly where you have to learn to be adaptable. Whatever you picture in your mind is probably not going to happen that way forever. So that is reinforcing that flexibility is super important.
And I'm not kidding. I just got a text from my kid's teacher that she has a headache and I have to pick her up. And this is the reality. It's true. Like, I would love to keep chatting, but I'm wrapping things up to take care of my own child now. And I'm super happy that we were able to touch on this important topic and to hopefully give people some perspective on parenting and product. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, Vanaja. And where can people find you if they would like to reach out?
I think I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me through my LinkedIn profile, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible.
But not after 6 p.m.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Bye, Vanaja.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Product Academy Tough Stuff.
We hope today's tough question gave you practical, actionable insights.
If you enjoyed the episode, do us a favor and leave a rating or review. It will help us grow the podcast and make future episodes even better.
Got a question for us? Send an email to toughstuff@productacademy.ch and ask away. We read any submission and might answer yours in a later episode.
Thank you again for listening. We'll see you next time with another tough challenge to tackle.
Until then, take care.